And we are live if I'm connect things right, which I believe I could. So hello dear listeners, this is Spiritual Alchemy Show, yet another week with me, and yet another reason to celebrate, because it's not just me here, yay, and I'm not the only person you have to listen to, yay, boom, the champagne. So this week I'm actually here with somebody I really like. They said you're not supposed to have favorites, but yeah, this is my show. I can have as many favorites as I want to. So this week I'm here with one of my favorites, and that's Madeleine Le Despencer. Hi, Madeleine. Lovely to have you here.
Hello, it's good to be here.
So. Madeleine is extremely interesting character. I guess loads of you actually know her and you are listening just so you can hear her. For those who don't, Madeleine is extremely charismatic person, which I believe you will be able to hear as well. But if you meet her, she is this beautiful lady with the big eyes and such a shy, almost innocent smile. And you're thinking, oh my God, such a beautiful lady. And then she told you she likes flowers and she's having her own herb garden, and then you realize she is into jewelry, and you're thinking, oh, that's all very cute, and she's a visual artist. I mean, that's cute too. And then you realize that the plants are poisonous, and she likes skulls rings and possessed nuns, and then you're thinking, where's the shy smile? And that's all amazing energy you can get from Madeleine. So that's what we have heard today here, because I like keeping things in a great variety. So today we're going to speak about a topic that not many people actually speak about or write about, or not many people even know about. Many people don't want to know about, and that's why I like it. So today we are going to talk about possessed nuns, skull rings, poisonous plants, saints and sinners, and everything in between, with the most amazing Madeleine. So hello, Madeleine, again. Thank you so much for coming. So,
thanks for having me.
So everybody's like, yay, possessed nuns. And just admit it. My listeners have dark souls. Just admit it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this. What is the Catholicisme Noir, if I'm pronouncing it correctly? I'm so out of French. Like, I'm out of school for like a million years. And I hated my French teacher, so it kind of reflects on my accent. So what is the Dark Catholicism and how you got to this?
Well, so don't worry about the pronunciations, because my Anglophone upbringing is going to mutilate the edges of them as well. So it's Le Catholicisme Noir, Black Catholicism, which also kind of literally would mean the universal black. And I was just looking for a way to describe sort of this undercurrent, especially in 18th and 19th century French culture, of an explicit sort of erotic diabolism, an undercurrent within Catholicism, because there's always, everyone knows that Catholicism is full of redemption and beauty and joy and blood and sex and death and starshine, and that's what makes it so delightful. You can't separate that violence and that passion from it. The further north you seem to go in Europe, it seems like they try to, but they never really can get it out completely. And it's such a marked difference from like American Protestantism, for example. But the Catholicisme Noir was just me trying to find a way to describe it that wasn't, the word Satanism, for example, because that's, to me, very sort of, it's so loaded down with American pop culture and sort of what people call dark fluff now. It's these notions of what I call sort of an adolescent contrarianism, an attempt to just sort of stand in opposition for opposition's sake. So Satanism sort of, and this isn't to impugn Satanists who are out there going, hey, that's not what we are, but
you don't understand. I just got Satanistic T-shirt from Hot Topic.
Yeah, I was just trying to find a way to describe something that was steeped in sort of the decadence, the French decadence, or just actually the European decadence, the 19th century and the early 20th century, and sort of those themes of beauty and delicacy and diabolism and violence and passion. And so that was sort of what I came up with, and also just a description of my own experience, my own religious experience, because it is sort of, to me, almost a mystery tradition nestled within a traditional notion of Catholicism. So hopefully that explains it, or puts a finer point on it.
But you are from, how to call it, pure background. You are from pure background. You are from a proper southern Georgia environment. So yes. I guess in that sense, it's hard not to come across, let's say, a very one-sided way of seeing Catholicism. So how, from that environment, you got into this, oh my God, there is different facets of it, and I like them. So how you been actually finding like your first, how you got into it? What was your first leads? Like, I guess there wasn't really that much in your environment. So was it internet? Was it people? How did you go in it?
Well, I was very young, so it's just an intuitive leap and a sense of, being raised in Savannah, Georgia, like growing up in Savannah, Georgia, and Georgia and Virginia, and these very southern, very religious communities, and being exposed to it, it was intuitive. I mean, I went through that phase that everyone goes through in their teens, where they sort of reject the spirituality of their family and their upbringing and seek out something exotic and different. So, I went through the usual route of Thelema and IoT and, Typhonian and all these explorations, even some Topi around the sides, and exploring all these sort of extremities. Extremities is the important thing, because that's something that carries on to this day, is that passion for the extreme, which is also something quite beautiful about, especially the folklore of the saints. But it was just a natural draw. It was, as time went on, I kept always thinking, I didn't feel any kind of, what's the word? I didn't feel any sort of struggle with my background or with the religion I was raised with. I didn't feel like I needed to rebel against Christianity. But I did feel like it was something that, having grown up with and having 2,000 years of history, arguably more than that, if you really think about, the Roman Catholic Church as actually being the Mithraean religion veiled. It's got 2,000 years of history at least. Why throw that away when you can explore that and unfold that and look at that in all these different ways? So that's kind of how it was a process of unfolding that's been happening for, I would say decades, but that makes me sound really old, so we'll say a long time.
So was it like, did you actually have like a people who kind of introduced you to it, or were you kind of on your own, very solitary explorer?
No, very much a solitary explorer. I mean, it's something that I came to just over the years, being fascinated with the artists and authors of the decadence, for example, like J.K. Huysmans, who wrote Le Bas and Against Nature, and Baudelaire, and all of these French poets and authors who were dealing with their own kind of cultural and spiritual identity, being from a religious country, France, which had done its best to sort of reject that religious history, and yet still couldn't extract itself from that inherent sort of passion and that inherent. There's quite a bit of violence in the history of France, and there's a wonderful book on it actually called The Headless Republic that talks about France and French history in the context of political sacrifice, religious sacrifice, and. So reading these, it was just, it was the sort of thing that gave me that sense of trembling and tingling of the sublime, and it was a natural draw of just wanting to explore further this notion of a spirituality that on the surface is quite normal. However, as you unfold it deeper and deeper, expands into these wonderful, almost chthonic aspects.
So we were mentioning Satanism and Diabolism, but I guess lots of people don't know what's the difference. Frankly, I didn't know. I thought Diabolism is just a French word or Italian word for Satanism. So it was actually you who enlightened me with the darkness. And actually...
I think, so like I was saying before, that Satanism is a very loaded word. And I've never identified as that. I don't identify with that. there's lots of argument that goes around today with, Satan and Lucifer are different people, and there's Luciferianism. But for me, I'm coming from a position that's really steeped in sort of the romantic Satanism, which would be Milton and Baudelaire and etc. And the 19th century notion, which really did blend Lucifer and Satan as images, as individuals. I mean, even Balzac kind of has a poem where Satan literally blooms into Lucifer as a gestating sort of seed. But for me, I don't like using the word Satanism, so I decided to use diabolism, because so much of the primary literature that I was reading would refer to it as diabolism or satanisme, because it's French. But the diabolism, it allowed me to sort of explore that aspect of what I call sort of a devotional blasphemy, without having to bear it with all that luggage of Anton LaVey or Temple of Set or anti-cosmic Satanism, etc., because it is none of those things. To me, it maintains a sense of delicacy and beauty. It maintains a sense of humor. It maintains a notion of sublime and the numinous. And those are the two most important things to me, is the sublime and the numinous. The sublime, of course, being mostly known as a concept from aesthetics. I think Edmund Burke was the first to write about it. Basically, you have the picturesque and the sublime. The picturesque is a nice painting of a pastoral countryside. Sublime is a painting of a roiling ocean that's about to destroy you. So the sublime, the beauty, because it can annihilate us. It's like Caspar David Friedrich painting, standing at the edge of this vast mountain range. You're overwhelmed by the majesty and the potentiality of the destruction of that beauty. It could overwhelm you.
That's so beautiful.
And the numinous. Pardon?
I'm just saying, that's so beautiful. You're making the dark sound so good.
To me, these are things that... and it's also being in the dark and not being in darkened, because there's a difference. You can be in the dark, but to be in dark, it needs to be limited and compressed and rotting. And I think those are two different things. And I think a lot of times one must be careful not to become darkened, because it can be quite oppressive. There's a difference between shining in shadow and simply being limited or destroyed by it. But so this notion though of like diabolism having access, and these are things that I think come by virtue of the Catholic theology and just the notion of working within the context of a slightly modified notion of Catholic, of catechismic evil. Rudolf Otto wrote this book called The Idea of the Holy, where he talks about holiness, how we experience it. And to me, I extend his notions beyond the holy, because he talks about the mysterium tremendum and the mysterium fascinans. So that's the tremendum is the mystery that repels you. So this is his idea of the experience of God, is you have a mystery that repels you. It's dreadful and fearful and overwhelming. And that's quite similar to the sublime, and that's where the numinous appears. And then there's the mysterium fascinans, which is the mystery that attracts, and that's how we are inexorably drawn to the beauty, an adorable quantity, or a redeeming. So that's Otto. My experience of that since childhood has been, I've experienced the same, but a draw towards the opposer or the shadow. I've felt that mysterium tremendum and mysterium fascinans towards, for lack of a better word, just evil, or the notion of evil, or the shadow of the cross, or the ink stain beneath the tabernacle. So I add on to this another notion, which is called I'm blanking on the word. Delectatio amorosa, which is probably my favorite sin. Delectatio amorosa is the pondering of doing wrong, or the meditation upon sin. It's not even the act of doing. It's simply becoming enamored with the imaginings or the visualizations of said evil. So essentially what diabolism then is to me is an experience of the sublime and an experience of the numinous through a chthonic, or through, forgive the term, a left-handed practice of devotional blasphemy. So you cannot blaspheme that which you don't adore. So for me, the idea of just going and doing a black mass is meaningless unless you've spent several hours of the day or week before in Eucharistic adoration, because why break something that you haven't worshipped? So that's kind of it.
So beautiful.
It's like Huysman said it really well. He says that in Labat, he says, from lofty mysticism to base Satanism, there is but one step. In the beyond, all things touch. And that to me is just the perfect summation.
Oh, you said it so nice. I was just like sitting here smiling, listening about darkness and violence. I think that's so beautiful. Oh, that's cute.
This bit kind of makes you feel tingly and like,
oh, violence.
I get the same feeling about bunnies too.
What makes you tingle? Just good old violence and bunnies. That's great. Love it. But it's but actually, when you went into your search into the shadow of the cross, as you said beautifully, you found out that obviously there is a side of Christianity, as I was like doing research for this show, that seems like nobody talks about it, or nobody wants to talk about it, like that not always, or all the abbés and nuns were not on this side. So I was like, okay, so this is actually a new thing. They've been actually like a people within the church who actually were saying the same things that you're doing, and they were writing books about it, and then nobody wants to talk about it apparently. So that's why you're on the show. So can you you were talking about Abbé Boullan, but I was trying to search some more about him, but I really couldn't. So can you tell us more about this interesting guy?
Yeah, definitely. So it's true what you're saying, that for millennia there has been sort of this natural inclination within Christianity. It's almost like, nature abhors a void. It continually flows back into this eroticized notion of itself. It can never really be stripped out. And there's lots of writing and research about sort of these early Christian sects which were explicitly sexual or who had sexual aspects. And of course there were the agape feasts, which we now know as the communion, which may very well have had a very sexual nature. And there were the rumors at the time that said that Christians ate the flesh of corpses and had wild sex with each other, because rumors traveled in the ancient world just like they do today. And it's interesting that the practice of Christianity just always flows back into those voids and those sexualized or those sort of forbidden chambers. It can't ever escape them. And Boullan would be one example of that, manifesting in the 19th century. I became interested in Boullan because of Labat, the book by Huysman. Labat is a novel written in 19th century France by J.K. Huysmans, who was a naturalist author. He was basically trying to write a documentary, essentially, of Parisian diabolism. He felt like Satanism was rampant in Paris, and he wanted to write about it. He wasn't casting any kind of moral judgment. He just wanted to document it. And it's sort of a parallel novel. It's writing about that as well as writing about Gilles de Rais, who is also very interesting. I have a personal practice where I venerate both Gilles de Rais and Jean d'Arc as saints, together, Jean d'Arc being actually a canon saint, and Gilles de Rais obviously not being. So in his research, Huysmans came to know this priest who lived in Lyon, who had as they would say, a reputation sulfureuse. His first letter to Boullan actually said, I've got a quote from it here, it says, "Several times I have heard your name pronounced in tones of horror, and that in itself has predisposed me in your favor." So Boullan was the boogeyman of 19th century France, and actually to this day he is the boogeyman amongst a lot of French Rosicrucians and occultists. I have been verbally slapped on the wrist for mentioning Boullan or his associate Ventray, because they're just evil, they're so evil. They're truly not. Boullan would have considered himself a devout Christian. So Huysmans reached out to him because he had heard that he was a satanic priest, and Boullan was hesitant at first because he'd actually experienced some bad times with previous writers from France, from Paris. He had been stabbed in the back by Oswald Vert and Stanislas de Guita. Both of them sort of conspired against him to drag his name through the press. But he eventually agreed to help Huysmans with his writings. And what Boullan did was he ran a church in Lyon called the Church of Carmel. And it was essentially an erotic fringe Catholicism. They believed that there were 3 terms of the Trinity, which corresponded with 3 ages. It's sort of that same sort of aeonic progression that you get in, other spiritualities, even like the Thelemic idea of the eons. This is actually a very old notion within Catholic mysticism of the ages. You have the age of the Father, which is the old Jewish God, Jehovah, who is corrective and prescriptive and vengeful. Then you have the age of the Son, Jesus, who is the age of forgiveness. Now, Boullan, and actually several other sort of French mystics at the time, believed that there was a coming age of the Paraclete. That's the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit would be the feminine aspect, the female aspect, the Sophia, the female aspect of God. And they would be ascended or they were already ascending into angelic beings. And so they could cure the sins of the world by sinning, because their bodies and their generative organs had been purified by becoming angelic. So they would practice these, arguably Catholic-style rituals. I've actually got several original manuscripts in my library from the Church of Carmel, from Boullan's church. And they read like kind of, just mildly sexualized rituals. But they would be performed in the nude, or Boullan would be nude under his chasuble. And it would usually result in a sex act or multiple sex acts by the end. They practice a form of incubism and succubism, which people always say is a bad thing. I don't understand why. I think it's great. But where Boullan or his magical partner, who's a fascinating woman named Julie Thibault, would take on, they would become Mary, or they would become Jesus, or they would become John the Baptist. And then you would have sex with another member of the community. And then that person could sort of ascend up the spiritual ladder by merging themselves with this ascended being in a sexual way. So, needless to say, this caused quite a stir.
Which is surprising that at that time in Paris, like in France in general, like you have to have some strong gunpowder to stir something.
Yeah, totally. And Boullan was a consecrated priest. He was actually under interdict. He left the church because they rejected his theories and his beliefs, and he got into some trouble because he had been practicing these sorts of sexualized rites for decades, ever since the earliest part of his career. But what's really interesting about Boullan is that he was always really focused on this feminine aspect of God and this the cultus Marian, the cult of Mary, as was a lot of French at the time was kind of still reeling from the revolution over 100 years before. And there was this idea that everyone had to pay for the sins of the country. And there were all these Marian apparitions. And Catholicism in the 19th century is called the Age of Mary because there were so many eruptions of Marian apparitions throughout the world, especially clustered in France. And Boullan became obsessed with this one particular one at La Salade, which is a particularly sort of apocalyptic Mary. They call it the Mary of the Apocalypse sometimes. Because she's basically was saying, this apparition of Mary was saying that she was growing tired from holding the arm of Jesus back from basically wiping out the world or letting go of the world. And they had to make reparations. They had to repair the souls of the world. And that's where his church was born, was the idea of the reparation of souls, or the repairing of souls, and the repairing of sins, even for those that, are not repentant. You could still sin on their behalf and make reparation for it.
That's so beautiful. I really, really like all of those ideas. So I know that's one of your inspiration sources, but you also like possessed nun.
Magdalena de la Cruz.
Yeah, Madeleine Cruz.
Yes.
You have the same name, so I assume that there might be some sort of like a linkage between the two of you.
Yeah, when I chose my confirmation saint, I chose Magdalena for Mary Magdalene because, I enjoy the whole folklore around the Merovingian bloodline and and I love the story of Magdalene. She's lovely and fascinating just in and of herself. But there was Magdalena de la Cruz who. In 1533, she was elected as the abbess of her convent, and she was considered to be a living saint by many, many people in Spain. When she was 5 years old, she decided to crucify herself on the wall of her bedroom, and she got her feet and her left hand nailed in and then passed out. She started having visions of a dark-haired man that would come to her during prayer, and she was sure that it was Jesus. And I think at 10, I think she was 10 years old when she tried to crucify herself. So eventually she became a nun and started to display stigmata, would prophesize, and then actually had an immaculate conception.
Oh, wow.
The convent was split down the middle as to whether or not it was truly an immaculate conception or whether or not it was fake. I don't think anyone wanted to say, well, she's broken her vows. Nobody could imagine that it was, a natural explanation. And the child mysteriously vanished. Angels snatched it away. So basically, she built up all this reputation, and she was just completely, people adored her. They sent her habit to wrap a royal baby in to protect it from evil. She was that beloved. And then one day she got really sick, and someone in her room said, "You're dying. You'll never see another Christmas." And so at that, she shrieks and then falls onto all fours on the floor of her room and screams, "1544, 40 years as prophesied, I am a cursed dog, drag me to hell." So she admits that she made a pact with the devil as a child to become a living saint and to be worshipped and adored. And her trial, which actually the trial documents are in the British Museum, the trial talks about the two demons that came to her and who she would have sex with. It was Boullan and Patoro were the two demons that she was involved with. And they were cast out in an exorcism. The exorcism took quite some time. And eventually she was, in auto de fe, she was sentenced to be walled up in her convent where she lived out the rest of her life in her cell. By all accounts, she had repented. But I found that to be a fascinating story, that this person was so close to just being a living saint or being considered a saint. And then it was all a demonic pact in their mind and their heart.
I like
so that
it.
is Magdalena de la Cruz.
It's a great story that you're actually making pacts with demons to become a living saint.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's funny because there's I think that there is a really utilitarian notion around spirituality and spirits and demons that we don't necessarily get so much now. I mean, I think a lot of people, especially in the occult world, get it with this sort of resurgence of all sorts of people, Grimoire people and whatnot, or getting into Catholicism, which is funny for people who like there's been some talk about if you weren't raised religious, it's funny to see people kind of working their way around the edges of it. And somebody said recently, I can't remember who it was, but they said a really funny line. I think it was Jose Lieto in his article in the New Conjure Codex. I think he makes a joke about how pagans have come so far that they've become Catholic again. But there is this kind of utilitarian notion around spirits and grimoires and magic. At a time when religion was so inherently tied up in daily life and so many people were Catholic, it was a wider playing field, so to speak. You had a much more utilitarian relationship between yourself and the spiritual world, or the demi-monde. So, for example, if you read the Original Experience. Sorry, if you read The Golden Bough, he talks about the Mass of the Holy Spirit, this French folklore from Gascon, which actually comes from a book by Jean-François Blade, Poésie populaire de Gascon. It's just traditions and stories and folklore from the region. But the Mass of the Holy Spirit was basically when a new priest would come to a town, and there would be hundreds and hundreds of priests. There's very few now. The church has a shortage of priests, but at the time you'd have hundreds and hundreds of them. And if you had a family of influence, and you'd probably be a second son. You wouldn't be a first son, so you wouldn't have any inheritance. So you'd be a second son. And if you were well connected, you'd be in Paris, or you'd be in a big city. And if you weren't, you'd be out in the middle of nowhere in the country with very few prospects, not much money, nothing to do. So you would go out to these provincial areas, and the peasants there would try and get you to perform what was called the Mass of the Holy Spirit. And to them, it was a Mass whose efficacy was so miraculous, quote unquote, that it never met with any opposition from God. So it was basically the most perfect Mass that God could never say no to. And so they would expect the priests to be able to do this. They expected priests to be magicians because they had this notion of priest as magician, which they are and they were, but we don't really see that as much now. That's something that's a bit lost to most. Interestingly, also, the same peasants in Gascon believed in something called the Mass of Saint Sicari, which it's probably one of the first written accounts of what we would call a black mass. And so they believed that you could go to a priest and pay a certain amount of money. And this is not unusual because priests, actually at the time, there was a class of priests who would travel around from village to village and do masses for money. That's what they did. They were floating priests, and they would say masses for a price. And so you could pay one of these priests, and they said that the Franciscan monks are the ones that would be most likely to do it, that would cause your enemy to wither away and die under mysterious circumstances. So it's
Amen. That's so cool. So, frankly, this is lots of it is obviously new information for me. I didn't know that you could actually pay a priest to do mass for you. I was kind of living in this idea that all of those priests are just doing the masses when they're supposed to doing in a church, and out of maybe some sort of a divine interference, divine inspiration. Okay, maybe not.
Well, it's you've got this population that's multilingual that can read and speak Latin, and so an enormous amount of the grimoires, when you find marginalia, they're being worked by priests. They're absolutely being worked by priests. For example, the Grimoire of Pope Honoris, which is my favorite. It's not to be confused with the recently released Sworn Book of Honoris. The Grimoire of Pope Honoris is a grimoire that's specifically written to be performed by a Catholic priest. You have to be a priest to perform this ritual, which is fascinating. And it actually turns up in the Affair of the Poisons, which was a really notorious thing that happened in France, where several people were arrested and killed for being witches and Satanists and poisoners. It happened between 1677 and 1682, and the Pope of the Grimoire of Pope Honoris figured into that. That was one of the black books that was supposedly being used.
I like it. It seems like the whole idea of priests are now having completely different flavor and completely different angle to it. But we've been talking about Black Mass, and I know what is not secret out of it. Can you share because there are loads of rumors what about Black Mass, what it is, and then everybody, obviously if you tell everybody it's secret, and they will imagine the worst thing they can possibly imagine. So what actually Black Mass consist of?
It's the worst thing you can think of.
Ka-cha! No. Yay! Where can I join?
It's various things, and there's all sorts of theories about where it originates from, and there's so much folklore and history around it. H.F.T. Rhodes has an amazing book called The Satanic Mass, which looks at the theory that it's a misinterpretation of the Cathar lore, that the Cathars, after being persecuted by the Catholic Church, hid within the Catholic Church, and the Black Mass started out as a Cathar rite because they rejected this physicality, this physical notion of the Savior, and they were mocking those symbols that they felt were evil, and by mocking them, they were making a holy statement. There's also a rebellious aspect of it that Michelet talks about in The Witch, his famous French work, which was the first book to actually look at the witch as being sort of a feminist icon or a revolutionary woman against an oppressive society. Then you've got sort of the Anton LaVey notion. He says that the Black Mass is essentially a psychodrama to break a link with the religion you're raised with, but I don't consider it that. If you look at, for example, the Mass of Etienne Guiberg from the Poisons Affair, and if you look at the Mass in Le Bas, which is very similar to that, it's essentially, it has to be performed by a priest or one who has been ordained with apostolic succession, because the apostolic succession is what enables the priest to perform the magical act of the Mass, because the Mass is the magical act. The sacrifice of the Mass is essentially reifying the body of Christ, like Christ in the wafer. It's the transubstantiation. So again, you come back to this notion where it's meaningless unless you're Catholic. It has no meaning at all unless you're coming at it from a position of adoration. You have to, on some level, believe the transubstantiation for the Black Mass to have any meaning at all, beyond just a symbolic temper tantrum. So the priest will bring Christ down into the wafer, into the wine, and make it the body and blood of Christ. In the Black Mass, it is placed into a wafer and then trod upon, or it's placed into a turnip, or it's placed into some item that is then ritually destroyed. So what's happening here is not, look at this turnip, let's pretend it's Jesus. It's literally, this is Christ in this room. We're taking the experience of the numinous. They're taking the experience of holiness and perfection and literally rending it apart piece by piece, which can kind of make your hair stand on end if you put yourself in that ideology, if you put yourself in that worldview, in that spirituality. If you believe that, then it's an incredibly powerful and terrifying precipice upon which to stand. But you have to be coming from it from that perspective, otherwise it's meaningless. It's kind of like, going to a Gnostic Mass if you have no investment at all in Crowley, or going to anything Protestant is boring, but no, sorry, I'm just kidding. It's like I always say, it can't just be this adolescent contrarianism. It can't just be this theatrical, I'm going to be evil for evil's sake. For any of it to mean anything, you have to actually be invested in the devotional aspect of it, which is why I call it devotional blasphemy. I spent a year in the RCIA to formally convert to Catholicism because I felt like my path was meaningless unless it was grounded and invested in something with tradition and history and devotion. So if I were to do a Black Mass, not saying I've ever done one or I've been in one, but if I were to do one, it would have to follow on the heels of saying a rosary for hours or doing Eucharistic adoration, which is quite an incredible thing to experience. It's basically sitting in the presence of the Eucharist and worshiping it. And there's some really beautiful things that happen there. But you can't blaspheme something that you don't love. You can't hurt something you don't love, and you can't be hurt by something that you don't love or long for.
Oh, is there something so you said something beautiful earlier on before we went online, and that is that your heart has to burn. And so I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. But how you can tell your heart burns for something and like that, and if it doesn't, how to make it burn? Obviously, no recipes including gasoline.
It makes me think of Simone Weil, who, as much as I read 19th century and 18th century works on Satanism. I also love works on Catholic mysticism. And Simone Weil is a wonderful mystic. He said that all sins are attempts to fill voids. You have to burn. I think for any of this to mean anything, and it's not like a path that I can say this is what you should do. It's more of a perception and a manner of being, which I can sort of describe. But you have to flame with that desire. You have to be engulfed with that need, or you're not going to experience the numinous. You're not going to experience the sublime. And how to make it happen? I don't know that I could tell someone how to make it happen, other than place yourself in proximity to the spiritual or the beautiful or the overwhelming, and yearn for it, and hopefully you'll experience it. It's a gift unto itself to experience it, and I just happen to find a way to take that gift in an opposite direction of where it's usually taken. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I don't know. You're not dominatrix who would tell people what to do. You're a beautiful whisperer.
I will do that for money, though.
Oh my God, I love this girl. So actually, I wanted to. It's very interesting what you said. Like recently, I was told that when you're following a spiritual path, that you have to have religion. Like they told me, like you have to have religion. I'm like, oh, I was thinking about it. It's like, do you believe that too? You think like if you're pursuing a spiritual path, it has to be a religion. I was told because otherwise the spirit won't take it seriously. And I was told that the other people, as you progress, will stop understanding you if you are not having it within religion. So do you believe you have to have religion for pursuing spiritual path?
No, I don't think so. I think religion is religio. It's the formalization of a spiritual experience. I think a spiritual experience and a spiritual path is different from the formalizing of that path into a religion. I don't think you have to have them both. I think it is helpful to have some formal structure in which you're working that you stick to. I think there's a lot of tendencies to sample and jump around these days because we have access to so much. People can sample from here and there, and this year they're doing this thing, and the next year they're doing this thing, rather than pursuing one thing towards its conclusion. I think there's some value in that. But yeah, I don't think you have to be a religious person. Even post-revolutionary France, they knew that the people needed some kind of religion, so they created the cult of reason, where it was church. But the saints were Voltaire and Robespierre, and they had hymns, and they had a new calendar. So it was religion without the numinous, but it was still a religion. It was still the rituals and the formalization.
Oh, that's actually quite cute, but I don't know. As a stance, it sounds a bit boring. Let's call Voltaire. Is this called Baudelaire if you want to call somebody like that? That sounds like much more fun.
Yeah, that's my idea of church. I mean, when I had my confirmation, I had a ring specially made with Baudelaire's Litanies of Satan engraved into it by this incredible artist I know. Her name is Finery Grace, and she makes all of my jewelry, and she made me this beautiful ring. There's a photograph of it, actually. I gave you a photograph that you put up on your on the event page, and it's a bit of human skull cap that she cut out for me, and then overlaid with a pentagram, and then throughout the ring she engraved belladonna flowers, because I love my belladonna. I'm sitting next to them right now. And the first stanza of the Litanies of Satan, because the Litanies of Satan is such a beautiful poem, and it's so absolutely perfect in the way that it expresses that longing, that intimacy that I was talking about, and the fact that in the French it uses the tu form. It's like he's not talking about, like, you talk about God and you're like, et vous, and when Baudelaire talks about Satan, he's like, he uses the familiar form, and it's just so gorgeous. And And yeah, so I would totally go to the Church of Baudelaire. I'm trying to make the Church of Baudelaire.
Oh, great! Sign me up. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the belladonna actually, because dear listeners, Madeleine is also, there's a spring, there's a time for gardening, and Madeleine is actually very much into gardening. Can you tell us something about your magical garden?
I like to grow the aggregate herbs for absinthe, because I love absinthe. I'm having one right now. It's a lovely rainy London night, talking with my dear Astrid and drinking absinthe next to my henbane and belladonna plants. We're growing a little slow this year because I don't have as much direct sunlight here as I used to when I lived in New Zealand. But I like to grow Artemisia absinthe, Artemisia vulgaris, and henbane. Mandrake's a bit harder to grow. I'm not growing that this year because I'm in a flat with no outdoor garden. I love them because I love the Solanaceae, the henbane and the belladonna. And belladonna loves me. It's just this droopy purple, the most beautiful purple you'll ever see. And it's my favorite color is purple. And it's atropine. It's the fate of Atropos, who snips the thread of life. It's a potentially deadly plant, which I used to line them up on the ledges around my bed in New Zealand, and I would just sleep in the shadow of them because it's not going to hurt you. The pollen from them won't hurt you. But if you eat the berries or the leaves, you can have a bad day. But there's just something about the spirit of the plant that I really adore. I don't think you have to take a plant internally. I've done a little bit with belladonna, but I wouldn't want to detail it, just so people don't go try and do it and then kill themselves. But I think you can really connect to a plant just by raising it and mothering it. Like I write about that in Contra Codex about Artemisia vulgaris, mugwort, that you can forge this beautiful relationship with the spirit of a plant just by tending to it from seed. And I just love the belladonna. It's a long-winded answer.
Actually, that's something I've recently heard from people, that you can, because obviously plant spirits, that you can actually do an essence from a plant, and you will make literally like an essence, either essential or some sort of like elixir, and then you mix it with a paint, like a black paint or some sort of like a lacquer, and then you can make like a special black mirror, a special mirror that's like connected to just like one one spirit only, and you can like talk to a spirit of a plant or spirit of whatever essence you will basically create out of it. So I was thinking it might be fun, like having like a belladonna black mirror, and you can like talking to poisonous plants.
Oh yeah, I mean belladonna was the devil's cherries. The folklore was that the devil would go and tend belladonna on Walpurgisnacht. That's his flower, and I actually have a scythe, a little harvesting knife, a herb knife that was just made for me by Cody Dickerson, incredible blacksmith in the Pacific Northwest of America. He made it for me. It's in the shape of the glyph of Saturn, because belladonna and henbane are Saturnian herbs. I think Culpeper said that the Saturn spares none, not even the astrologers. And these Saturnian herbs are just so important to me. I had to make me this knife, and he actually bathed it in tincture of belladonna and henbane to consecrate it. So that's definitely a wonderful thing, is to use these to make render them in oil or make tinctures in alcohol, and then use those to consecrate and empower objects or things around the house. And you totally need to read P.B. Randolph. Speaking of the magic mirror, you got to read Pascal Beverly Randolph.
Oh my god, like wherever I move past 3 weeks, wherever I move, Pascal. It's like I can't move without Pascal just literally waiting around the corner. Okay, I'll read Pascal. Like, it's like Pascal for me sometimes. I'm just like, feel like every time I open Pascal and he's like, blood, semen. I'm like, I didn't, like, okay, blood, okay, but I don't have semen. So, like,
yeah, there is always that aspect of sort of like, privileging sort of this solar phallic, or this phallic aspect or approach to magic, which is what's really interesting about Maria de Nagloska, who is a Russian woman who was operating in Paris in the 1920s and 30s. And she actually translated P.B. Randolph into French. His Magia Sexualis we only have because of her translation. It's been lost. His original was lost. And she wrote about sexual magic from, obviously from her perspective as a woman, and she was writing about it. Some of it is a bit, it may seem dated these days, but it's brilliant. It's wonderful. And it also ties directly back to Abbé Boullan, because she was continuing on a lot of those things that Boullan and Vondré were doing in Paris in the 19th century. That idea of the coming age of the Paraclete and the feminine aspect of God manifesting in the world. And, as H.P. Lovecraft said in Call of Cthulhu, all of mankind will flame new ways of debauchery. I'm paraphrasing, but it's essentially there's always been a certain interesting, sinister quality to that age of the Paraclete for me.
So it seems like, I would say, in the past, this idea of a dark Catholicism was not necessarily maybe not necessarily tolerated, but it's kind of was living kind of peacefully on the edge of the, I would say, the mainstream Catholicism. How do things are now? Do you think it is getting do they still have to live kind of in a shadow, or is it more integrated, or is it less integrated? What's your current experience?
It's never been an organized thing. I think you did have in Paris, you would have had people getting together and having a black mass for a hoot, or you would have, for example, the rumors have persisted to this day that the Abbé of Holy Blood at Bruges was performing black masses, and I do think he probably was, out of at least curiosity or just sort of sexual adventurism. It's never tolerated, it's I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, that she's okay, she's a bit of a Satanist, but we love having her around the church. I mean that diminishes it too. It's just not something, unlike a lot of other things that get discussed to no end on Facebook or on forums. It doesn't benefit from being overanalyzed or unfolded in public. I mean, you could talk about it and talk about the fact that it exists and talk about history, but I just don't see people getting together and having coffee moots about the satanic, diabolical shit they did the day before without it becoming a bit laughable. It's today. I don't know. I know other people peripherally who have felt that same call, and we've talked around the topic. But it's not an organized thing. It's not like people saying we Catholic Catholics want some more recognition. It's not like that. It works well in the shadow. It doesn't work well if you take it out and overanalyze it in the light. It works best if it's something you unfold privately in yourself. And I ought to sort of mention something I didn't mention earlier that I wanted to talk about, was that one aspect of it, you're talking about it being hidden within the church. I find a lot of interest in the idea that Roman Catholicism is the solar phallic cult of Mithras. Constantine basically said to the Roman legions, "You're all Christians now," and took what was predominantly Mithraean culture and said, "Okay, y'all, we're going to make this Christian." And actually, it wasn't Constantine that made the official religion Christianity. I'm blanking who it was, but I know somebody who was going to message it to me afterwards. But the point of it is that if Catholicism, if the Church of Rome is the solar phallic Mithraean cult, then I would consider the diabolism to be the lunar sister that's hidden within it. It's the lunar aspect. And there's this image of the skull at the base of a crucifix. You'll see them often, these crucifixes with skulls. And the idea of that is that the blood from the crucifixion runs down into the bones of Adam. And I've often visualized this lunar diabolism as being this inverse path that runs down through the cracks of Golgotha and into the earth, and is essentially a mystery school that you can unfold from within the Catholic Church.
Oh, Oh, so beautiful.
It's intensely personal. You have to find it for yourself, and you have to unfold it for yourself. And I think it unfolds for different people differently.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm quite sure, like, at this point, everybody is like, oh, dark Catholicism, so beautiful. There's no way.
If something's not beautiful, it's not worth it. I just can't stand the banality of evil, like things that are banal and things that are ugly. Like, why have ugly things? Why have banal things? Like make everything in your life delicate or beautiful or special. It's just, if it's not beautiful, then it's not worth it.
Now everybody knows why you're my favorite.
I love you too. I want to go walking in Highgate in the middle of the night with you again.
And you know what? I want to take you to Absinthery in Prague.
Yes, coming to Prague.
Yeah, in Europe and in US they have a Starbucks. We have Absintheries in Prague. Come to Europe, be a decadent and sublime. Can you, like, last 3 minutes of the show? I'm quite sure, like, everybody's now absolutely fascinated by you. Usually with you it doesn't take long. So can you tell the fascinated listeners when they can find your books? Because obviously you're not just talking about it, but you're writing about it. So when they can find your books, your website, all of you.
Yeah, next year I will have a book coming out called Catholicisme Noir, the Devotional Blasphemies of Abbé Boullan from Three Hands Press. But up until then, if you go to ledespencer.com, that's LEDESPENCR.com, you can visit my website, made for me by the amazing Elizabeth at Haitian Press. And there you can click on publications and you can read my articles online. You can see links to books where I have articles published. For example, the Luminous Stone, the Three Hands Press collection about Lucifer. I have an article in there about Abbé Boullan, Ventre, and Maria de la Gloasca, and that Luciferian Christianity that they were all espousing. So you can go there and find most of what I have. And you can friend me on Facebook. I accept just about, if we've got 5 mutual friends or so, I'll accept you. So friend me on Facebook, and I can look at the weird shit I do.
You're so nice. I'm like never accepting anybody. I'm like, what you are. Okay, I'm just like being paranoid, but
yeah, like if you've got like a Pepe avatar, I might not accept you. So that goes back to the banality thing. Like, that's so last year. But
that's so great.
I accept everybody as long as there's some connection.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Madeleine, for coming, and for the rest of you listeners with the melted dark hearts at this point, if you would like to listen to the show again and again and again and again, it's going to be on Mixcloud. I'm going to upload it. I'm assuming going to upload it first thing tomorrow, so you can find this show on an archive on www.spiritual-alchemy.uk. Please add this show on Facebook as well, so you'll keep up with the events that are happening. And I will be looking forward to see you next week, and we'll be talking about Italian folk magic. Thank you so much, listeners, and see you next week.